Thank you very much, Mark. I'm Jermaine Cascio. I'm here to introduce Alan Moore, or as I've been asked to refer to him, the Alan Moore. He'll be our first speaker, and it's my duty to introduce him. I was going to tell you about his secondary career as a stunt pilot, flying World War II Spitfire planes and air shows around the world, but I thought I'd talk about something a little bit more interesting: engagement. Alan's work is an exploration of the facets of technology-enabled engagement. In his book, Communities Dominate Brands, he looks at engagement from a business and marketing perspective, and I'm sure he'll share some of that with you today. But more recently, he's begun to look at engagement really as an engine of social and political transformation. Systems of engagement, whether we're talking about peer-to-peer, collaborative media, technologies of cooperation, or yes, mobile technologies, have become catalysts for a new vision of how our societies can work. More democratic, more transparent, yes, but also incredibly disruptive to incumbent institutions and the status quo. And this, on balance, is a good thing. Many of our technological systems have been turned into mechanisms for reinforcing the dominance of dangerously outdated models of how the world works. In many ways, the multiple crises we're witnessing now emerged from established forms of power overstaying their welcome. What Alan sees is the potential, the need, for technologies of engagement to break this dominance and give us a new world. And I was kidding about the stunt pilot stuff. So, ladies and gentlemen, Alan Moore.
Well, what an amazing introduction. And great to see you all here, actually. I love coming to Amsterdam. I always have a great time when I'm here talking to people, and thank you very much for the Momo guys asking me to come along. I feel like I'm keeping some great company here today. I want to talk about social marketing intelligence, and this is going to be wrapped up in, because I've only got 30 minutes, so the broader topics that Jaime talked about I can't cover in this presentation, but wanted really to talk about data and commerce and technology and how these things are actually transforming our lives and how we need to sort of be thinking about these things differently as we kind of move forward. So the reason why I've got this image up here is in fact that we will be in the near future fighting wars over precious resources. In fact, I think there was one in Iraq already. But I think equally we will be fighting wars over information and over data. Who has it, how we use it, how it's applied, what the legal implications are around that, which is a topic which is already sort of coming to the fore, I think. So I want to make the point, however, that technologies do not come out of nowhere. They are human inventions in the first place, and they succeed or not to the extent that they meet fundamental human needs. So why many of us sort of talk in this room about the fact that media has a great control over the way that we perceive our lives and our world, actually we have a big influence over how we direct technology. And I think actually there's something that we need to think about this as we sort of then sort of explore this idea about commerce and data and social marketing intelligence. Because if Gutenberg, 500 years ago, printing on his printing press, if society had not looked at what he had done and said, well, actually, this could be enormously useful to us as people, he would have been stuck in Mainz, printing in his garret on his own, and we wouldn't have had the Enlightenment. So I think we need to sort of think about these sort of three core questions, which I think is extremely important for us. But I want to start with identity, because identity and technology, in fact, have a very intimate relationship with each other. For millennia, our identities were shaped by external forces. And what that means is it sort of created a world, an environment in which we were experiencing the world and seeing that world in a certain type of way. Now, just to give you some example of that, I live in an old agricultural village about 15 kilometres outside of Cambridge. Now, 250 years ago, I would have been born in the village, I would have worked in the village, I would have met my wife in the village, I would have gone to market in the village because it was a market town, and I would have died in the village. I wouldn't have even gone the 15 kilometres to Cambridge because there wouldn't have been any reason for me to go. Whereas today, actually, our identities aren't shaped by external forces. And in fact, actually, we're cut adrift in this world where we've got to go on a quest for identity, which for many of us is fantastic because we can start to create our internal worlds in the way we want them to be. But for other people, that's extremely problematic. This is called psychological self-determination, and it's something that I think is one of the big underpinnings of what we call 2.0. Because we are, in fact, a we species. Human beings have an innate need to connect and to collaborate. And one of the sort of defining sort of movements, trends, meta-trends that I see developing is the fact that we are actually on a quest to be able to reconnect in a way that makes us human beings. In sort of medieval times or pre-medieval times, we would have in Northern Europe about 115 festivals a year. So although we were actually tied to the land, we were actually partying and participating and creating all sorts of things together, which kind of bonded us as people. And where does the word communication come from? We use this word every day of our lives in terms of media communication, commercial communication. Well, that word is communion. It's about coming together and sharing together and transcending together. So I say that what is happening within what we call the world of 2.0 is we are creating a we media for a we species. We want, as Henry Jenkins talks about, a participatory culture where we feel we have the right and the ability and capability to actually engage and participate, whether that's emotionally, intellectually, creatively, in a whole range and gamut that makes us human beings. And that, for me, is something which is extremely important. And through this process of communications, we are transforming ourselves. Somebody once said that actually people say the same, it's technologies that change. I don't think that's entirely true in many ways. Now, Howard is sitting in the front row here, and I had the privilege to meet him a couple of years ago. He was a big hero of mine and still is when we wrote Communities Dominates Brands, and reading his book Smart Mobs had a huge influence on me, and if you haven't read it, I suggest you go out to the local bookshop and buy a copy today. But Howard talks about something which, for me, is really important in framing the way we think about our world in terms of how we are going to engage with it. In this instance, as I'm going to be talking about commercially, is technologies of cooperation. Human beings are a we species, an innate need to connect and collaborate. And we're kind of done, I think, with the world that we've been living in over the last sort of 100 years or so, because it's not actually making us very happy as people. It's no accident that the technologies we create are based upon this idea. And if there's one thing from this presentation I'd like you to take away today, it's that idea that we are creating technologies, and the emphasis is on the word cooperation rather than the word technology. Now, this is a great quote from Woodrow Wilson. And I think in many ways, you know, the whole Obama campaign was kind of indicative of the way that we were using those tools, those technologies, the idea that in fact we wanted to change, or America wanted to change itself at the very heart of what made it America, or what various people have made America over the last sort of 10 years or so. And so I just wanted to show you a couple of technologies of cooperation. This is, comes from Kenya. It's called Ushahidi. And it was created out of a group of people who were asked to help put together a piece of technology that enabled people around Kenya after the general election, which created a lot of violence and bloodshed, to be able to record information, even at its most basic level, via SMS, that could be then sent up to a platform where that could be geotagged and located, because they realized at a certain point that they would need to go through a reconciliation process. And mobile was the only way that they could be able to sort of make this happen in gathering this information from the field. So this Kenyan lawyer reached out for people and asked them whether they would cooperate and collaborate around this project. And it now has created a huge amount of interest in terms of how people can harness their collective intelligence for the better of society. Another version, and I'm going to come to this, of technology of cooperation is a thing from Japan called help networks. Up here is a hyperlocal map. You've got little purple figures on there with kanji characters which say what the name is and what they do. So basically, there are people which can be offering their services as plumbers or as babysitters or a short order chef or someone that's just got a bit of muscle and can come and move some boxes. And let's say last Thursday I broke my arm, but I need to get some shelves put up. I can go on to help networks. I can look within my kind of location area of who is out there that actually perhaps could come and help me fix my boxes, okay, or put my shelves up. This for me is a really interesting way of understanding this idea about the nature of human beings, our collaborative ability, but also the way then that helps us organize our lives in a very simple way. And I will come back to this because I think it's got some very interesting points to be made in terms of how we think about commerce and data, because this is the thing that is sort of underpinning these two things going forwards. I do like to say that people embrace what they create. And it's definitely, again, something which is part of this sort of mobile Web 2.0 world, which is extremely important for us. And so if we're thinking about the types of businesses that we want to create or things that we want to generate in the future, we have to understand this principle, that when people do embrace something, they are prepared to put far more energy and effort into the creation of that. Now, it was Bob Garfield that wrote this headline, "Your Data with Destiny," which I think is a kind of nice pun on it. Although, funnily enough, he didn't talk about mobile, which sort of, for me, sort of was interesting because he was being blindsided by the fact, as Vince Cerf said recently, that if you thought that the internet had been very disruptive over the last 20 years, mobile is actually going to take us into a completely different sphere altogether. And the word social networking drips off our lips like water on a daily basis at the moment. But if I asked every single one of you in this room to draw me a social network, I'd really be interested to see what that looked like. I would imagine there would be a few kind of squiggles and some lines and maybe some dots, sort of maybe connected to each other. And you'd kind of be in the broad sort of principal area of sort of the understanding social networks. But I thought I'd show you a few social networks so you could start to understand the power and complexity of the network society and how data changes completely about the way that we think about what we do in so many different ways. So that's a social network. That has been created by a very powerful algorithm that has scraped and harnessed massive social data flows and started to actually turn that into a map. It's a very beautiful thing. But that's a social network. And 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 that's a social network. That's a mobile social network. And I think that it's fair to say then, you can argue that we are living in the networked society. But as you can understand, the type and nature of networks and social networks is actually very varied and quite complex. And what sort of layers on top of that then is a thing we call social network theory. It's a study that's been going on for a very long period of time. But essentially, social network theory allows us to start to understand the roles that we as individuals play within different types of networks and social networks, and actually how we influence each other with those types of social networks. Now, what it means then is, if I'm someone that is part of a mobile operator, and I have, say, 10 million subscribers on my network, actually what I've got is 10 million social networks of networks, which is made up of granular individuals which are connecting and connected with each other in a whole variety of different ways. Then if you're sort of starting to think about how you start to sort of make sense out of that commercially, what you need to understand then is there are three sorts of data feeds that go into this. There is the demographic third-party data. That's important. We know all about that. There's behavior. Yes, we know all about that. We talk about behavioral targeting. But then there is the social element. And this becomes what we call a 3D profile. And it creates a far more granular piece of information or intelligence. By refining that data flows, you're getting something far more interesting as an output. It was the founder of Sun Microsystems that said, privacy, there is none, so get over it. Very powerful algorithms are in fact scraping what we do within the network world. And quite rightly, I think that we are having to then have very serious conversations about identity and data, who owns it, how we use it. But the fact of the matter is from time immemorial, we have always tried to have information on each other in a variety of different ways. Part of this new world of, a cooperative world where we want to be more human in many respects, there is this pendulum swings both ways, which is also then we have to be able to present ourselves and have our identities maybe displayed or understood in very different types of ways. It means that we go from understanding people explicitly to implicitly. And that definitely gives people the willies, you would say. It makes them nervous, and I would understand that. But from a media perspective, we go from this idea of actually identifying audiences through CPMs or online through a CPC model, where actually we can start to identify the most relevant audience for the most relevant message or communication, what I would call CPRA, cost per relevant audience. Now there's a real upside for that for both buyers and sellers in this market, which I'll get to. Marketing breaks down into two very simple practices. One is offensive and the other one is defensive. So offensive, we're trying to launch new products, we're trying to increase our revenues. Defensive is we'd rather people not churn off our networks and our platforms. So Stratechery marketing intelligence tools then start to play very defined roles in terms of actually whether we're playing an offensive or defensive capability, using the very refined data resources that we have at our fingertips. And interestingly enough, I think that in the very near future, marketeers will have a very powerful UI sitting on their desktop where they will actually be able to see dynamically how people are sort of behaving, interacting, moving on their social network or platform. And what we have up here is a thing called social revenue per customer. So back to social network theory, if I'm someone that has a big influence over a part of my social network as an influencer, if I leave say a mobile subscriber, I have an 8 times negative impact on the revenues of that company. It's not just the loss to me. So that's extremely important. And it's something that at the moment I think is operators are only just sort of starting to get their heads around, or other people are starting to understand that we need to think about networks and social networks in a very different type of way, and about the dynamics of how we are constantly talking and engaging with each other. But the other side of this is that I would say people need brands and brands need people. It's just that in the 21st century, we need to help those people and those brands find each other when they need each other the most. And if I said the word advertising to you, and I asked you, how would you describe advertising? You would say, well, it's a TV ad, it's a pop-up ad, it's a radio ad, it's a billboard, it's a double-page spread, whatever it is. And I would say, this is but the furniture of advertising. Advertising for me is a message that has a commercial agenda from one to many or many to many. And it beats me that in today's world, we have dragged the furniture of advertising, some of it created 500 years ago, in Gutenberg's printing press into the web, and some of us are now trying to get that into mobile. Who in this room uses a search engine? Right. What are you searching for? Furniture. Okay. But the right furniture, okay? Not any old furniture. You're searching for information. And you value that information in terms of its currency, whether it's timely, whether it's relevant, whether it's contextual. So if we understand and we agree that Web 2.0 technologies are built around human principles of sharing and cooperation, and if we all agree that we live in a sort of a world of search where what we're searching for is the currency and value of information, why on earth are we trying to use the old models of commerce in this new world? So back to help networks. Wouldn't this be a wonderful way of reinventing classified advertising for mobile? Where you're able to help people find each other and connect to each other when they need each other, as a service. Where you're really helping people. You know, it's no accident that the iPhone App Store had 1 billion apps downloaded in under, 9 months, I think Jamais pointed out to me. Because actually people are looking for stuff that really can be helpful to them. And so we can use data, both in terms of how we understand networks and social networks better, but we can also use that data to deliver something of a value or a currency to us in our daily lives that could be really helpful. We can also think about what I call mass niche communities of interest. This is a Mobizine, a mobile magazine for Japanese girls, which was set up in 2003. It's a whole kind of community platform, and ultimately people can buy fashion accessories from their mobile phone. Now, interestingly enough, we like to say, well, of course, that's Japan, and that's not relevant to us because they're different. I don't think that's true. What's different is the business model. Now, even in Japan, when this guy set this business up, he was told by the fashion houses that he would never make money selling fashion items off the mobile phone. Last year, he made 83 million euros, and he flies around in a Learjet. 40,000 girls will turn up in a football stadium to be part of the Girls Walker community. And the girls that walk down the catwalk are actually part of the Girls Walker community. And they're encouraged to blog and to talk to each other and to participate. So they're able to exist within a bazaar that is unique for them, which is what I call a mass niche community of interest. Now, this is a campaign which is a push marketing campaign, but timely, relevant, contextual information plays a very important part in this. BMW, I think it was last year, ran a campaign where the most important piece of information they needed when people were buying new cars during the spring and the summer of that year was their mobile phone number. As the first snow started to fall in Germany, people would receive an MMS, and on that MMS would be a picture of their car, their right model in the right colour with the winter rims and tyres superimposed. And it just said, wouldn't it be a really good idea to think about buying or getting your winter tyres and rims sorted out now? So for a $60,000 campaign, they got a return in revenue calculated on some numbers that my friend Tommy Ahanen did of $45.5 million. Timely, relevant, contextual information. And we did some work with T-Mobile in Germany last year, and we helped them reduce their cost of churn by 40 million euros by understanding how people might be churning off the platform, because the analytics can then become very predictive. But it means that you can start to think about how you might sort of use your marketing collateral. And if you've got data at your fingertips that can allow you to respond, you can start to think of very different ways in terms of how you might be engaging with these people. So I would argue that customer centricity is the thing that we must be the most obsessive about as we move into this sort of new multi-access user network. I think CRM and customer service is actually kind of plays lip service to actually really thinking about true customer centricity. and putting it at the very heart of what you do. And so in many ways, that what I would argue, which is that social marketing intelligence is in fact the black gold of the 21st century. It will be a defining part of how we create commerce, how we create services, how we're going to create things that are going to allow us to thrive and survive in this new world. So what should we be doing? Well, I think we really do need to understand that your customer community is in fact made up of a network of networks, and that we need to use social marketing intelligence to do that. Equally, I think that we need to be able to create platforms and services that really enable people and are built upon these fundamental human principles of sharing and cooperation. And this is a kind of my mantra in terms of sort of any brand or business that I consult to. I say you have to be one of these three things. You have to be life simplifying, you have to be life enabling, or you have to be navigational, i.e. help me navigate through the complexity of the life that I'm living in. So these are a couple of books that I wrote. The social media marketing one kind of goes into what I've talked about in a little bit more depth. And with that, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alan. Actually, one question leaps immediately to mind. What you've described in terms of a world of advertising is a lovely ideal, but doesn't really reflect what's happening right now. One thing that does reflect what's happening right now is the proliferation of a variety of means of blocking advertisements, whether it's the use of the skipping button on your TiVo or digital video recorder, whether it's a pop-up blocker or actually an ad blocker in Firefox. And you can sort of go down the list of methods that people use to avoid advertisements that are not appropriate and directed and relevant. What do you think, I don't know if you've given this any thought, but what do you think are some of the implications of the intersection of the rise and the explosion of social media, technologies of cooperation, and advertisement filtering, the kinds of technologies and mechanisms used to block ads?
Well, I think it sort of comes back to really the point that, I would say that a number of things. One is that markets really thrive around knowledge and information exchange, commerce, and entertainment. And I think that people are looking for, which is my point about search and the currency of information, where what you've really got to be able to do is to start to think of how if you have a commercial agenda that you have, where actually what you're delivering is seen as a service or something that is actually going to kind of simplify your life, which is why the emphasis on the help networks thing is something then where you would see that not as something that is intrusive into your life, but is enabling in your life. And I think that that for me is something that is something that I can't impress more upon. And I think that perhaps it's the mobile world to a degree, although you can see sort of some of these things happening in the internet world as well, where you're changing the entire paradigm of actually what advertising is all about. And if anyway, there's a kind of that's my message here, because I think increasingly people will block more and more that which is seen as actually making their life complex. So we talked about this idea of complexity. Mm-hmm. We increasingly feel that we live in a increasingly complex world. So if we can take that complexity and simplify it, you then are offering up a value to people, to users, where what you're going to get is the most important thing, which is recommendation. I recommend you use this service because actually this is really helpful to me.
Right. How long would you imagine it's going to take for the broader marketing world to wise up?
Yes. Well, I mean, I think that they're wising up in the sense that I like to say, when companies hemorrhage cash flow sort of, in 3 quarters on the trot, and then they kind of do a bit of staff cutting, and then you get another sort of 3 quarters of cash hemorrhage, I think they kind of start to realise that they're a bit fucked. But the problem is that it's the paradigm and the mindset that they've got which worries me. Mm-hmm. And I think that back to this sort of, technologies don't come out of nowhere, they're a human invention in the first place. What Carlota Perez talks about in her book, Technological Revolution and Financial Capital, is there comes a point, and I think we're right in the middle of that, where the existing organisations and infrastructures are in great resistance to the change. And so I think what will happen is that you'll get, unfortunately, the period is going to take longer than I'd like it to be, mm-hmm. and it could well be, another 10 years before we're fully over where we are at the moment. We will see other industries die. So if I think 10 years ago, for example, the newspaper industry should have asked itself the question, it's Monday morning, we've woken up, and the reality is paid-for display advertising is no longer a viable business model. What the fuck are we going to do? Yeah? And they didn't ask themselves that question. They weren't prepared to, or there's a whole variety of actually quite complex reasons. Mm-hmm. But then I think what might happen is what, we were talking about it last night, whereas, when we wrote Communities Dominates Brands, I mean, that was a year when Facebook was launched and MySpace. The word social media wasn't even on people's lips in 2005. Mm-hmm. And yet we've seen this incredible acceleration over the last 4 years. So I think that it's sort of, for me, I would say, conservatively 10 years, but we might see, citadels tumbling much quicker when the money really starts to run. I mean, who would have thought that in Britain, the 3 biggest commercial TV broadcasters would have been in merger talks? That's extraordinary. 1977 in Britain was when we had the biggest TV audience ever, which was 29.5 million people to watch the Morecambe and Wise Christmas special. Today, a mass audience in Britain is around 6 million people. Right. So the economics is already demonstrating itself, And I think actually there's a kind of rapidity now which is going on. It's a question of how long they will cling on to their existing, world.
Right.
So
well,
time to jump in.
Yes.
Because thank you for the presentation, Alan.
That's okay.
It's time for Q&A from the audience.
Okay.
Please stay on stage for a minute because you'll have the opportunity to introduce your man. Yuri is upstairs with a mic and Claire is going to have some questions through Twitter. So, here we go.
Yes, Alan, a few questions asked by the audience. One of them by Maarten, also known as Dutch Cowboy on Twitter. He's got 2 questions. Is this the near future? What about in 5 years? And another question immediately afterwards. What's your view on VRM, Vendor Relationship Management, which says that social media is temporary?
I think it's a bit like, we discussed the sort of time frame. I mean, I think that I would say it could be at the longest 10 years. We might just see massive change in the next 5, because I think the fact is that the cash is flowing out of those the existing industries. I think the problem is the renegotiation of what comes next. So how do we finance journalism? How do we finance good journalism? We've got to find a model to how we make that work. But I think it really is about people kind of creating stuff almost from scratch. I think social media for me is actually a bit of a misnomer, even though we used the title in the book, because actually for me it's about communication. It's social communication. And so I would say that it's misrepresentative of what is actually happening. VRM is something I kind of touched on in a way, which is actually VRM is about renegotiating the relationship between buyer and seller. And this is where, for me, I left advertising in the late 90s because I could see that it was highly toxic. It wasn't the right way in terms of how brands could be engaging with their audiences and creating value for them. But again, you know, people have to hurt pretty badly before they realise that actually the old way of doing stuff doesn't work anymore, unfortunately. And that's not because there aren't enough people out there telling them that that's the case. There's a great saying which is, I embrace progress, but I hate change. And I think we're very much in that world at the moment.
Okay, good. Well, hope that answers your question, Maarten. Another question by Steven Kruisberg, also known as Kruidhof. How do you see this we speech thing emerge as a mainstream phenomenon?
I think that you already see it in terms of, you know, we asked ourselves, for example, why was Pop Idol such an incredibly successful mass media format, which has then been followed by X Factor, and we looked at it around the world. This idea about personal transformation, engagement, the idea that even if it was a principal idea that we could participate, but, you know, contestants were walking 200 miles in Ethiopia to be part of that show. The interesting thing is that the second Pop Idol in America, which was the first time that texting was used, was at the time the biggest texting event in the world, which was extraordinary because America didn't have a texting culture at that time. But the really incredible thing is that 30% of those people that sent text messages had never sent a text message before. So you have to ask yourself your question, what do you need to do to get people to change their behaviour? You have to get them to actually, you know, feel that they want to participate and engage in something. We looked at, when we wrote Communities Dominate Brands, actually, we looked at the internet, we looked at mass media communications, we also looked at architecture, things like the Eden Project or the Guinness Visitor Centre in Dublin, where actually there's this model we talk about, which is the 4 Cs, which is commerce, culture, community, and connectivity. And you have to find a wonderful fit between these 4 principles, where actually then you can start to think about whether that's a kind of micro kind of level form or whether that's a mass media form. Even with, say, like newspapers, is there a way in which actually you could think of a rich cornucopia of ways that, you know, you've got professional journalism, but you can get other people to engage. The Guardian, actually, the media Guardian in the UK is probably one of the best examples of a media brand that's really tried to embrace the idea of the old with the new and exploring what the models of that are, actually.
Okay, good. Is there room for more questions? Okay, because there was another one on Twitter, but it's probably... Is there room for one? No? Okay, then I have another question from Imar de Vries on Twitter. Why the emphasis on a social as a fundamentally good thing? Going to war is very much a social process as well.
It is, but I think that unfortunately there are people that sort of made decisions about going to war. If I think about Iraq, which we fundamentally disagreed with and we weren't listened to. I think that I remember when Obama got into power and my friend in California emailed me and he said, we're drunk and we're deliriously happy. And I said, so's the rest of the fucking world, actually. You know, so I agree with you, but I mean, ideology is something, I mean, one of the things that I think we are in terms of the current work I'm thinking about is we are actually in a big process of renegotiating what type of world we want to live in and who is in control and how we use that control. And I think that actually goes right up into governments at the moment, and I'm sure all of you in this room are aware of the MPs' expenses scandal that's going on in Britain at the moment. You know, there is a systemic abuse of all of the institutions of power that we experience every day, whether that's, you know, journalism, media, government, etc. And I think that, for me, comes back to this idea of we as a society have said the technologies that we want to move into centre stage over the next 50 years are what Howard calls technologies of cooperation. They enable us to be more transparent, they redefine trust, they make us be more accountable to ourselves. And so maybe in that instance, we will challenge people and have more power in terms of whether we will go to war in the future and what reasons we would if we decided to go down that route.
Okay. Room for more? Oh. Andrew.
Alan, if you were advising Twitter right now, the world's largest real-time social network, what would you tell them to do with regard to social networking and joining the dots?
I mean, again, I think that they should be developing, I think, case histories for people in terms of allowing them to understand actually the power of how rapid information can transform people's lives. So one of my favourite examples is the fact that the Los Angeles Fire Department uses Twitter. They follow 2 people, and they have, last time I looked, over 2,000 people following them. So they say, you know, it's 5 o'clock, you know, Junction 5 on Route 101 is now shut, and it's going to be shut for the next 5 hours. You're delivering a public service. So I think that they could look at helping people understand how rapid transformation of information can be, so it's back to that timely, relevant, contextual stuff, can help people in a variety of different ways. I know that teachers in Britain use Twitter to actually Twitter to each other if they've got a question they can't answer or they've got a problem they're facing with. So again, there is a kind of a myriad, there's a spectrum, there's a rich spectrum in terms of how you can use that information and communication in a positive way. And I think that they should be looking at themselves more as a foundation, I would say, in many ways, rather than thinking about how they stick a commercial into this thing that is actually perhaps not going to be what its true DNA is all about. You know, I'd happily put $5 of my money on the table to help Twitter sort of, you know, do that. Well, I mean, I think that if you look at back to Obama, I mean, you know, when he raised his war chest, I mean, Hillary said it's going to cost you $2,000, you know, to put your hand in your pocket and contribute. And Barack said, we don't want to do that. If you've got $5, anyone can be part of that, you know. And that is part of the reason why he raised so much money, you know. So I think that Twitter could do a lot of good to help people understand the true power of the rapid dissemination of information.
Okay.